Hello everyone. Today we'll be talking about the recent decision made by the FDA to deny the application for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD. And today I am sitting here with a very special guest. I asked her to come to the channel. Her name is Ashley Booth, and she is a psychotherapist in the clinical trials. So we're going to be talking and discussing everything related to this decision, maybe what led to it, and anything else that Ashley wants to share with us. So first I want to say welcome to the channel and thank you for saying yes to this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe the first question I want to ask is, why did you say yes?
I said yes to this because I felt like it was important that more people understand what happened and that we continue to educate the public about this important issue.
Thank you, Dan, for being part of that education. As everybody knows, in this channel we talk a lot about everything related to healing, and especially healing the mind, and this is part of that movement. Okay, so just to give us a little bit of context, can you tell us what your involvement was in this?
Yeah. So I have been working with the clinical trials on there, all the phase 3 clinical trials. So the FDA takes us to be able to get a drug approved. You have to go through 3 different phases. So I was part of the last phase 3 trial, which we've been doing for the last 5 years. And at first I was a study coordinator, organizing all the data and at the clinical trial site here in Los Angeles, and then became a therapist on the trial, doing the therapy with all the participants. So it was a pretty monumental moment to be able to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. What are these 3 phases?
So yeah, the FDA, there are several different phases. So phase 1 is where we use, in this case, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for people that don't have any condition. We're just using them in healthy volunteers to just make sure that it's safe enough. And so that's phase 1. Phase 2 is when you start to use that, apply the drug to a population that you want to treat for something. So in this case, we're using MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD. Mm-hmm. So phase 2 is in the treatment of PTSD. And then these are all, those first 2 phases are smaller sample sizes. And so when you get to the phase 3 trial, you're going to do, again, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD, but in a much larger population, because you want to say, are there other emergent issues that come up when you look at it in more people? Mm-hmm. So we were looking at it in that context. So I was part of that phase 3.
So phase 2 basically is, all right, we believe that this is not that dangerous. Let's try it on a few people. And right. Phase 3 is like, I think we can actually try it in a lot of population. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As I hear you say that, it almost feels like, well, if it passed phase 2, mm-hmm. One would think that phase 3 would be much easier to pass in a way, because it's like, okay, we already tested it on people and it seems to have worked. That's why I went to phase 3.
Right. And it worked very well in the phase 2 trials. Like almost 75% of people were not diagnosed with PTSD anymore. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, that is a lot of progress. Mm-hmm. So if it worked so well in phase 2, what do you think it went wrong in phase 3, if anything? Because maybe nothing went wrong.
Right. And that's a big question. So I don't think that anything went wrong in phase 3. We had the FDA pre-approved our protocol that we were using, and we achieved breakthrough status in 2017. And so the FDA said, great, if you do this exact protocol and nothing crazy happens and you don't get any extreme adverse events, then we will approve this. And that's not what happened, right? And so we submitted the application, or Lykos did, submitted the application, and it went in front of a committee of experts that the FDA kind of consults with on the applications. However, the people that were the experts were very uninformed about the details of the trial, and they asked a lot of questions that showed that they didn't know about the details of the trial, and then it became this echo chamber of misinformation during that hearing, and the FDA ended up following what they had to say. And it was pretty bizarre because I was watching, it was like an 8 or 9 hour hearing. I watched the whole thing, just watching everything happen. And it was really frustrating to see that, yeah, these things were kind of, these issues were brought up, and then there was no one there. Lykos didn't get to kind of like correct people or give them the information when they had a question. No one answered the question, and so then it just became this sort of like, oh, well, that seems like a problem. Oh, we should really look at that more. And it's like, well, we have looked at these things. So it was really frustrating and confusing.
Who are these experts?
Right. So there were people from Kaiser, the VA, different kind of organizations that are involved in the field of drug distribution and insurance. And so, but yeah.
So they're not exactly experts on the topic of MDMA.
Yeah, they were not experts on the topic of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. There were maybe 1 or 2 people on the panel that were more familiar, that asked maybe more relevant questions, but everyone else, because it's such a specific field, and it combines different fields. And that was also what was getting people tripped up, because the FDA is a drug approving organization, right? It's not a therapy approving organization. And so they don't regulate therapy. And so the fact that these two things were coming together, it's confusing, because like there's just not really a regulatory body that knows how to handle something like this.
Like, who is in charge here?
Right. And so it's where you're having 2 different groups that are in charge of the different aspects of it. The FDA being in charge of the drug aspect, and then state psychotherapy boards being involved in making sure that the therapists are, trained enough and have the right credentials to be able to provide the therapy.
Were these quote unquote experts related to therapy in one way or another?
No, not really. I didn't see really anybody that was, if they had been in service provision at some point, seemed like it was a kind of a distant past, because there were certain people that said things like, well, we already have treatments for PTSD that are approved by the FDA, so why don't we just use those? And it's if they worked though as well as they should, then there
would be no PTSD.
Yeah, exactly. And just as a side note, so this was a placebo-controlled study, meaning that half of the people in the phase 3 or any of the trials got a placebo, and the other half got MDMA. Even the group that got no MDMA and just got a lot of really good therapy, they did better. Their PTSD scores dropped more than any other current treatment on the market at the right now. So even without the MDMA, the therapy, it was really effective. So that was also kind of an interesting result.
Wouldn't that, I want to play a little bit devil's advocate here.
Sure.
If placebo plus therapy worked really well, wouldn't that, in the mind of non-expert would be a way to go against MDMA? It's like, oh, well, if it's just therapy,
right,
then what's the point?
Well, but the MDMA assisted psychotherapy still did significantly better. Right. So we're just trying to figure out, well, what is the what's the signal of the therapy, and we can kind of remove that, and then we can see what the signal of the MDMA is on top of the therapy.
Got it.
So that's why we do placebo.
And also because that's the protocol that was approved.
Correct.
I know this story from talking with you behind camera, but I think maybe it's worth for the listener to understand this aspect of the protocol, and the part of the placebo. You were telling me, I'm sure you can say it much more eloquently, that one of the reasons why they denied it was because the placebo for people who are taking something that is psychoactive is going to clearly not be placebo, and they are going to know. But I think I want to let you speak on this because you say it so much better. The question would be, why has it failed?
Yeah. Well, so right. So the standardized way of looking at whether a drug is safe and effective for some or for some indication is to use a double-blind protocol, which means that the participant doesn't know what they're getting, and the person that's giving them doesn't know what they're getting. It's basically like coded some way so that if I give them the drug, I don't know what I'm giving them either.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so
I knew that the participant didn't.
Yeah, so that would, I mean, if it would be single blind, it would be just the participant doesn't know, but I us that are actually giving it. So that's all coded, and then the data is just sent back and then uncoded to see who had what. So there were concerns that were brought up in that hearing that said, well, people could tell what they were getting, which is in a way a little obvious, and it was very known and predicted that people were going to know, and that people have been doing clinical trials on psychedelics since the late 50s, right? And so placebo control is a really tricky model to try to meet with something like this. And so the FDA still approved that model knowing that was going to be an issue, and still said, yes, please still go through with this. And so then the hearing of all these experts, they were like, seemed very surprised that people could tell, and that it was as if the FDA hadn't approved that. It was like new to them. It was weird.
Oh my God, that sounds so frustrating.
It was really frustrating.
So there are several issues here. One is that they are using an old model, or maybe not even old, like a model of testing drugs that work for drugs that are not psychedelic.
Right.
And which could be an excellent way of doing it. But then they are applying it to something that is not compatible with that.
Yeah.
And the FDA is like, okay, it doesn't matter that it's not compatible. I guess this is the only way we've been doing things, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, you could, other ways that it's been done, but just not in a big trial, like, is to use an active placebo, meaning, so like some earlier of the trials that were done, not with MDMA, with other psychedelics, they'll use niacin. And niacin creates a flush in the body. And so that might be a way to kind of like trick people that maybe something's happening if they're psychedelic naive. The other way to do it, and this was done to a certain extent in the phase 2 trials, is to use different amounts of the drug. So rather than no drug at all, we use a little bit and then a little bit more and a little bit more, and then you see which one's the most effective. And so they did that in the phase 2 trials, which is in something called a dose finding study, because they have to figure out, well, what dose do we give people? And so you give people all these different doses, and then you see which one has the best results. So we don't know what they're going to ask for, to try to mitigate for this, or if we already have the data that they asked for and they just need to kind of like continue to review it. So.
Yeah, I want to ask you about what's next soon. I still want to stay in this part of the conversation for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Did the FDA have considered these potential options? And if so, why did they go with the usual placebo, non-psychoactive, route?
I don't know exactly. I wasn't part of that part of the process, but I think it was because it was the standard protocol to use the double blind, and that was what they approved. So we went with that.
This wouldn't have been something that could have been prevented, right? Like if the FDA approves a protocol, you're like, okay, we're doing what you're telling us to do.
Right. And not only that, we got breakthrough therapy status, which was supposed to mean that there was going to be less critical looking, at the protocol on the back end, because we were doing all of it front loaded to say, here, go through every single detail of this and pre-approve everything, and then we will follow exactly what you said.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask, what did breakthrough meant?
Yeah, yeah. And that breakthrough status also was because there's a huge need for this therapy because of so many people that are suffering with PTSD, and that the treatments that are out there are not that effective.
So to summarize this part, the FDA tells you to please go through this protocol, and it approves it. It achieves breakthrough status, and there is a feeling that this is very needed, and so it seems like they were like all for it.
Yeah.
And so they tell you, please go on phase 3 using this protocol. It's going to be fine. And then you reach the moment of the decision, and the decision is not made by them. It's made by a different set of people, which are the experts, and they did not agree with the protocol, even though it was already approved by the FDA. So,
well, that's what's confusing. So it's not that they didn't approve, that they didn't decide, because they did, but they were very influenced by the panel of experts. But the panel of experts were not intricately familiar with all the details. It was as if they kind of just got propped in, given like a couple of notes on what to look at, a briefing, and then they were supposed to make a decision. And it was like, it was odd.
So why do they consult with people that are not familiarized with the protocol or the medicine that's being administered?
Well, I don't know what it's like normally, because I think all other drugs that are typically for cancer or heart disease or whatever, it's kind of a similar pathways, and people will ask similar questions, and the trials are all kind of similar. And this is just so outside of the norm, both because the effect size of like how effective it was so like different than they were experiencing. The sample size was much lower, because if we have a really big effect size, like 2/3 of people were not diagnosable with PTSD after the treatment, then you don't need so many people to be able to prove that it's effective, right? To prove that it's significant. And so typically, like drugs that don't have a big effect size, they need thousands of people in their clinical trials. We only had like 200 because it was so effective. And there were like low dropout rates, because normally people are like, I don't really want to do this drug, or I'm getting weird side effects, and they'll drop out of like typical drug trials. But this is like a really involved therapy with people that are really invested in their healing, and therapists that are invested in the person's healing. So very few people dropped out, and more of the people that dropped out are the ones that got placebo than the ones that got the MDMA.
Wow.
Because they're asked to get off all of their meds, and then they're not given the MDMA. And the therapy's good, but like that also is really hard.
Wow. Like all the signs point in the direction of, please, let's approve this to start helping people heal from PTSD. We're talking about something very serious.
Yeah. And I mean, it was gonna be paradigm shifting no matter what. And we're gonna need to work out a lot of details on what the rollout was gonna look like.
Do you think that the people making the decision in the FDA know this? Or this is something that they have no idea? They just consult with these people, and then these people tell them to not approve it because they didn't agree with especially with the part about the placebo, because people on MDMA are going to know that they have not been given placebo, or people on placebo will know that they are not given MDMA, and that because this is the main reason why it failed, right? Like, am I right, or is there another reason?
We don't know. It also, there's like this incongruency where it seems like the people that approved the protocol were not the people that were like approving it 5 years later. And like even the person that was the FDA voice in that hearing also seemed like he was quite biased, and didn't also seem very educated about the whole thing. And so it was surprising, I guess, because I was expecting people to, need to read through all the details to make an assessment. And it just didn't seem, at least from what I saw in the public hearing.
Wow. Something's broken in the system.
Yeah, and that's what's been brought up, and that the FDA even acknowledged that.
The FDA acknowledged it?
They acknowledged that that the hearing was not actually, that the system needed to be edited, and so, or shifted in some kind of way. And so I think this is shaking up a lot of things. And So we don't really know what's going to happen next. So the FDA declined the application. They gave Lykos, which is the company that submitted the application, they gave Lykos, a big letter of why they didn't approve it. They haven't released that letter, I think, because they're kind of organizing their, because they're going to kind of make a response or to try to say, okay, well, here are the things that you wanted. We already have that data here. Look at it here. So I don't know. I mean, the FDA asked them to do a whole other phase 3 trial, which is just a lot.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that.
It's millions and millions of dollars in years. And like just the manpower that went into doing it already has been incredible. So, and I'm not sure what exactly they would want us to do differently. And so I think that's, as Lykos is getting their ducks in a row, they're going to be working with the FDA to see what the next steps are.
So the decision can be appealed?
It seems to be, yeah, where they're asking for more data, right? And there is an appeals process. And so I don't know what strategy they're going to use.
It sounds like if they want to repeat the whole phase 3 is in a way that does not include a placebo. If that was one of the main reasons, they probably want that to be different, right? But if that doesn't change, then you already have the data.
Right, pretty much. All of the questions that they had, I think we already have the answers that they need. So
you would say that even though the decision was made, there is a potential way of using the data that's already there and a way of answering the questions that they might have in order to appeal it or to ask them to revise something in order to not have to start all over.
Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know, but I'm peripheral now because the study has closed, and so because we were contracted, we were a research group that was contracted by MAPS to do the study. Or what's now, I'm confusing that. So MAPS, Public Benefit Corporation, was the one that actually ran the trials, and then they've recently changed their name to Lykos. So I'm using them a little interchangeably. So
that's good for both for the audience and for me also, because I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and that was a nonprofit organization. They created a public benefit corporation to run the clinical trials, so they called it MAPS and PBC. And then in this pre-approval process, they changed their name to Lykos, and they're still a public benefit corporation. Mm-hmm. So just as a side note, I mean, it's pretty amazing that the whole clinical trial is millions and millions of dollars to bring it through. This has been a 35-year process, really, that MAPS has been going through. And it's been groundbreaking because all of the research has been donation-based and funded by people that felt and they believed in what was, that there was promise there. And so, when have you ever heard of a nonprofit, donation-based pharmaceutical company?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I never thought of it in that way.
Yeah.
I am very familiarized with MAPS, but I'm also aware that, and MAPS is not only a big name, is the name around clinical trials and trying to bring psychedelic assisted psychotherapy into legality and to heal PTSD and potentially later other mental diseases. So I am familiarized with that, but I think maybe somebody listening to this might be like, what do you mean MAPS? You mean a map? So I wanted to name that because you and I can be talking and kind of skipping through what seems obvious to us. Yeah. But so you've been a part of MAPS and a part of these trials as a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
Could you, just to lighten it up a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I know, it's a lot.
Which kind of transformations or healing processes have you witnessed as a therapist for these trials?
I'll combine a little bit of the kind of data part of it with this story, but so the way the protocol is that people do 3 MDMA sessions spaced about a month apart with a whole bunch of therapy sessions in between. So I'm not going to get into all the details per se, but, and I would say that, what we saw was that most people, 2/3 of people were not diagnosable with PTSD afterwards. And so what was interesting to me as a clinician was to kind of see what kinds of the arcs that people had through those 3 sessions. Like I had one participant, and she was a therapist herself, still severe PTSD, but like a really solid foundation of mental health. And so she, after the first session, she was like 90% better. And so that was really interesting to see. And then the next 2 sessions we did with her, it was kind of like ironing out some like other kind of more minor things. So that to me indicated that like when people had a much better preparation, right, that they have maybe done a lot of therapy beforehand or a lot of self-work, that there's a really solid foundation, and then they can just catapult really quickly. Whereas I had another participant that had done next to no therapy and had a really hard time looking inside of herself. And she went through the process and got somewhat better, but like, I could see that there was still a long way to go. And so obviously we were only able to offer her 3 sessions, but when this does get approved, whenever that is, we'll have the ability to offer people more medicine sessions to be able to continue their process forward, or to maybe say, okay, here's maybe do some deep work and then go do some just solid therapy to do some deep integration work to then prepare to kind of do another layer deeper with the medicine. So, so I think that's something that I'm, because we're kind of, the broad strokes are we're just looking at the big numbers, but as a clinician, it's more interesting to think about like how do we support people through this process, and what the different ways that it can look, because part of what I need to do as a therapist is really trust their process, and to hold that trust for them, right? Because this isn't the kind of thing where their symptoms just kind of keep getting better. It's like we're opening a whole bunch of stuff up, and you might start to feel a lot worse before you feel better. And so that's not the typical way that our drug system works. It's like, here, just take this and then you're going to feel better.
Because usually it's more symptom-based.
Right. It's
and you're treating
management.
Symptoms. Here is not that.
Right. We're going to the root, and we're looking at belief systems and nervous system states. And so, I know you talk a lot about the inner child work on your channel, and that was something that continued to just organically come up in the therapy. People would get in touch with their younger version of themselves that was abused, or, something happened, and they were able to have this increased capacity for compassion and caring for that inner child, rather than seeing it as something shameful that they needed to hide. And so people would, MDMA isn't typically like a visionary medicine, but people would have strong mind's eye visions of what I would call it, of like themselves, or feeling in close relationship to these different aspects or different parts of themselves. And so I'm a therapist that does internal family systems therapy, which is something that talks about those different parts of us, the different aspects that contribute towards our survival system. The thing that was really interesting about being an internal family systems therapist and seeing that those parts and how people reacted to them mimics the internal family systems process. Mm-hmm. So organically, even though we weren't doing that kind of therapy with them. And so that has been a lot of an indication to the field that internal family systems therapy actually works really well for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So, what could come next, is we just need to get this approved, and then we can start to hone, well, does MDMA work best with this kind of therapy or this kind of therapy? And we can start to actually hone what can be combined with MDMA and what protocols could be different for different indications. So we're not there yet. I mean, there's lots of sort of smaller studies that are being done for MDMA for different kinds of applications, but we're at a bottleneck right now.
So when this gets approved, a whole world of possibilities can open
Totally.
for mental health.
Yeah. And that's one of the other things that's going to be a really important piece that the FDA has a lot of control over, which is whether the drug can be offered off-label. So what that means is they might approve a drug. So for instance, ketamine is another kind of psychedelic adjacent substance that's been used along with psychotherapy to treat mental health disorders. So ketamine has been approved by the FDA as an anesthetic. So, but it can be used off-label because there's been enough research in the field to say a doctor can make a judgment to say, I see this research that's been done, and I'm going to make a clinical judgment to say, I'm going to give this person ketamine for their depression, not as an anesthetic. So that's using it off-label. So on-label would be as an anesthetic. Off-label is for something to not that indication. So in the case of MDMA, we really want MDMA to be able to be used off-label because we don't want it to just be for PTSD. Obviously, that would be great, but it can also be helpful for, we've seen studies for eating disorders, for social anxiety, for generalized anxiety, for depression, for all of these other mental health disorders. And so that's something that we're also hoping that, because if it's not allowed to be used off-label, they would have to go through and do like a whole other study to go through the FDA for MDMA for the treatment of depression as opposed to PTSD, which would be not a great indication or like use for resources.
If something is used off-label for a while and it proves to be very effective for all of those things, does it need to go through all of those trials again if one day wants to be used officially for those things? Even if it has, let's say, been used for 100 years and everyone's like so much happier and there's no eating disorders anymore and all of that, it would still need to go through that.
Yes, because and this is where ketamine's in this no man's land. Insurance won't cover it unless it's approved for that indication. So ketamine...
It comes down to insurance, huh?
So the insurance wants to know that it's safe and effective for this treatment, which makes sense. Like they should know that, and it should be approved. I'm not going to give you snake oil to be like, hey. So it makes sense, the reason why the system is the way that it is. And ketamine's sort of this example of how, because it's off patent, right? So no company is going to invest more money into making it into a treatment, taking it through the whole FDA system to make it into a treatment for depression, because they're not going to make any money off of it because they can't patent it. So there is one company that created it's called Spravato, which is one particular kind of form of ketamine that they were able to patent. So this is kind of the situation where there's these little situations where if you've got a chemical that's not allowed to be used off-label, then you're going to have to take it through this system to be able to have it be officially indicated for that problem that they're trying to treat.
So for now, maybe the goal is to have it approved for PTSD and then use the rest off-label, off-patent. What would be
off-label?
Off-label.
Yeah. But yeah, and then as we were saying earlier, that it's it's the problem with the insurance, because the insurance won't cover it unless it's like approved. So I think that this issue is going to continue to become something that needs to get pushed. And so there are a lot of people that are starting to work with, the system that is in place to figure out ways that we can get more things covered by insurance so people can get the support that they need.
I can imagine that after some time, when it is so clear, it is so clear for us, right? But when it is so clear mainstream, if you will, or for everybody, to that this actually works and works much better than anything that has been tried until now, that maybe there is some social push, maybe some movement shows up, or maybe even the same lawmakers that see their own daughters or wives or themselves improve with it, end up pushing toward it, and maybe something changes in the future in ways that we cannot expect yet.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
And there's one more thing that I think is important to note, which is that the United States exports a lot of its own culture. And many of the things that happen in the US end up happening later on in other countries. So even if MDMA gets approved just for PTSD and it's like that for a long time to come after that, it would still create a big ripple effect in the rest of the world around the validity of something like MDMA. So I don't know if you want to talk about that. I also know that I think Australia already made a few steps forward around this.
Yeah, Canada's made some big steps. Australia has too. I think we're all collectively kind of trying to figure out how this will work. Right? I would say that Oregon's probably, I think, is really paving the way of like what this could look like on a state-based level. And so we're just needing to come up with these different models because, I mean, as you said, like this is a really an amazing treatment and is going to be more effective than everything else that's available right now. And it also needs to be done well, right? And there are so many different factors that need to come into place to have it be done well, both from a training and, supervision, and offering through the insurance. There's just so many pieces that need to come together. And so it's a complex thing, but we have to keep trying.
For people that are not into this as much, who might be listening to this, that might think of MDMA as a party drug, right? Like you and I, we both grew up in a society where we didn't even call it MDMA. It was ecstasy, and there were, other amphetamines in these pills, and who knows how clean it was and from where it was coming. Most likely, a lot of people still associate MDMA with partying and, kind of having a serotonin rush and then being depressed later. And you mentioned earlier not only the psychotherapy aspect of it, but also that it can be beyond PTSD, it can be for depression, it can be for eating disorders, it can be for like an array of different things. And if I would be one of those people, which I'm not, but at some point I think I was, I would be wondering myself, what do you mean MDMA or ecstasy for therapy? Like, isn't this meant to party and drug? Yeah. What would you say to those people?
These substances create a different perspective, a different consciousness, right? The word psychedelic means mind manifesting, or psyche manifesting, and the goddess of Psyche is the goddess of love. So it's making us see things from a different perspective. And so if we're in a context where it's about music and connection, and it's going to enhance that. It creates chemicals in our body that are pro-social. It lowers the activity in our amygdala, which makes us less fearful and maybe less hesitant about going up and saying hello to someone. And it makes it really great for people that are having a good time and wanting to connect with others. In the same way, those same helpful array of characteristics can be used in therapy, because if someone is feeling less fearful and more safe around people, it's going to be easier for them to process through their trauma. And so these tools are so powerful. And so we're just barely scratching the surface of what they can be used for. And we just need to be curious about them and not just put them into a box and just say, oh, these are just drugs and they're useless or they're addictive or whatever it is. And to actually have a nuanced, intelligent, well-researched approach to this.
I love that. I'm glad I'm not the only one in this channel saying that. Have you worked with veterans?
A few.
And how did it go for them?
It went well. Yeah, it was Yeah, I mean, what I saw in them was the same thing that I saw with all the other participants, right? Everyone, that PTSD has similar underpinnings in it, from depending on if you have an extreme situation like going to war, or if you've had some abuse of some kind. We did need to sort of approach different cases in different kinds of ways. So for veterans, there's a particular kind of profile around, there's camaraderie, there's a stream, looking at our values, right? Because people that go to war, like, they got to believe in why they're doing that, or what they feel like they're serving. And so what having those kinds of conversations, we'd sort of approach the therapy from a particular way. Whereas someone that maybe had chronic abuse growing up, their healing process might be a little bit differently. So one of the things that I like to make sure that the public starts to think more about is that PTSD is yes, there's veterans, and I think that that's a community that we need to serve. And most of the people in this country or around the world don't have PTSD from war, or from being a soldier, right? It's from typically extreme abuse in childhood, or occasionally accidents, but it's generally the more relational types of traumas that cause the most issues with people. And so having a substance like MDMA that helps foster better emotional bonds is really beautiful in that kind of way.
I didn't know what PTSD would feel like until an event that happened to me as an adult. And then after that, I understood it really well. Just a word around that topic, just an image or a smell that I would experience years later would trigger panic, would trigger a state of dissociation when clearly everything around me was fine.
Yeah.
So I understand much better from an experiential level what PTSD is. And yeah, I agree. It's not just war. I think it's obviously associated with war a lot, because I think it's probably very hard to not come with some level of PTSD if you have seen really horrible things. But those things can also happen to any of us, and very often they do happen to any or to most of us, even in adult life. But of course, childhood is even more. What happens in childhood is stronger because you're
More susceptible
and more impressionable.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind too is just that one of the things why psychedelics are healing in a very different kind of way than most other substances are is that we're actually going down to the root level of what the issues are. And at the root level, it's all sort of similar, right? Whether it kind of comes up as anxiety or depression or trauma or as something else, those are kind of like just the manifestations of similar sorts of patterns. And the patterns are, understanding where we had needs that were not met, how we got disconnected from our bodies, what belief systems we made about ourselves, others, in the world. So getting down to those level of that's how we do true healing, and these substances help us point down into that. And so for me as a clinician, moving out of sort of a paradigm of you have depression and you have dysthymia and you have PTSD and you have social anxiety, and putting these labels to see that it's less important. I'm not treating different people all that differently. We're all getting back down to these same kind of things. And so everyone, to a certain extent, has some kind of trauma in that they didn't have their needs met in some sort of way, and that it affected them and it affected the way that they now view themselves in the world. So that's more important right now. And I think that that's maybe a novel way of approaching it, that people aren't thinking of it that way. It's just like, oh, I have depression, so I need to take these pills.
Right. So instead of for depression, this pill, for anxiety, this other one,
Right.
for PTSD, this other one, it's like all of these are manifestations of trauma and needs that have gone unmet. And it's almost like this way of approaching healing makes the manifestation of it not matter too much. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it manifests as depression or
Yeah.
anxiety.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you can treat the root cause, and these medicines take you there. But I think this also points to in the importance of the therapy. Like why you need a clinician,
Right.
you need a therapist to go with it, because if you take MDMA at home right now and like, oh, I have PTSD, I'm going to start taking MDMA at home, you like these aspects of yourself might show up, but they might not be able to be held properly, or
Yeah.
a belief system might come up, and you don't have anybody there to point that is a belief system that can
Yeah.
change or be held, or whatever that can be, right?
Yeah. And I would say that, eventually my hope is that we can get to a place where we are all well versed enough and have the vocabulary and the awareness of how our psyches operate, so that we can do more of our own healing in community and without the need of professionals, and that professionals are maybe only needed in very extreme cases, but we're not there yet. And most people don't have that foundational knowledge of, wow, I can identify my feelings, or I even allow myself to feel, or I can feel my body, or I know what my needs are, right? Those are, that's a very big ask even now, even though that's kind of like in many ways sort of step one. So, yeah, and I mean, it just is right. And it points to how we need the therapy and we need the education. And, some of the feedback from the advisory panel was like, well, do we even need the therapy? Maybe it's just the drug. And it's like, well, no. I mean, and there were people that were saying, well, 40% of the people in the trial had tried MDMA before, so maybe there's a bias. And it's like, well, no, because they had done, and what actually proves our point in that they'd done MDMA in a different context, clearly still had PTSD, and then when they did it in a context with therapy, it was healing. So it's not just the drug, it's the combination of the drug and the therapy that actually does the healing.
I see that in my practice with ayahuasca as well. I would say 50% of the people don't need the facilitator, and the other 50 do. And out of the 50 that do, not everybody knows that they do it. So some of those people believe that they are getting the healing, and in reality, I see them either dismissing their feelings even more, being like, "Oh, I should forgive my mom and forget about my anger about her, because I can now feel what it would be like to do that, right?" And sometimes people without that guidance can go into the wrong place, believing they're going to the right one, and sometimes they clearly need the facilitator because they have no idea what's going on. So
I feel like everyone could get there eventually, but there just might be a lot of like casualties along, not actual people dying, but just like a lot of unnecessary pain, right? I mean, we can lean into the traditions and the wisdom that we have accumulated both in this kind of new wave of psychedelics, but then also we can look into all these different cultures around the world that have how they approach healing and self-discovery, and we can lean into that wisdom. And so I think the therapy is just sort of a manifestation of that accumulated wisdom around how our psyches operate and what things are good things to take a look at, right, and not bypass.
That's great. Quick question. How long did these trials last, and do you know how much money was spent in it?
I don't know how much money, but it was millions and millions and millions of dollars, like a lot. And as far as how long it lasts, I mean, MAPS was founded 38 years ago. But so it took a long time to do the phase 1 trials and the phase 2 trials, and then the phase 3 trials took about 5 years.
So this last stage that was denied was 5 years. So
the whole I mean, that's the whole thing. That this was the final process of that whole 35-year.
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying the whole thing.
Not that it typically takes that long for drug development, but just because it was all donation based. So
yeah, and also there was a big backlash against psychedelics in general.
Yeah. So there was a lot to get through to get even just those early stages.
So, in the worst possible case scenario, if this were to be repeated, the whole phase 3, that would mean another 5 years and another several millions of dollars that are only donation based.
So Lykos has shifted their business model to in preparation, and so now they are working from a more traditional non-donation based like investment approach to try to move it to this next stage, which is, what we may need, because there's less people, there's more companies out there that people can invest in psychedelics, and so less people are inclined to donate anymore. Before, it was like MAPS was the only one in town, the only game in town, and so people were donating, and now people are like, well, I could invest in this company and hopefully get some return rather than to donate. So the playing field has changed, and so MAPS is needed to adapt to that as well. And so that's why Lykos is now kind of shifting in the way that they do their business. And as far as the timeline goes, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be 5 years, but I don't know.
Okay, well, let's hope for the best.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of really amazing people working on this that have brought it even to this point. I think at this point it's just probably a matter of time and a little bit more effort.
Yeah.
Are you going to continue being a clinician for these trials if it were to be?
That would be great. Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to have to we all kind of disbanded because we had finished the trials, and that was maybe about a year ago. And so it might be a different permutation, but I like to contribute to the research and what it is that we're doing. So, and in a way, I don't know what I'm not worried that this is not going to ever happen. Like, it's going to happen, and my heart goes out to the people that have been waiting a long time for this. And when I look back at the grand scheme of things, we're just going through this really awkward adolescent phase of our human evolution to get into right relationship with these non-ordinary states of consciousness from our modern perspective now. And so it's just a messy time. And it's an interesting time to be alive and to be attempting to support humanity to go in a more heart-centered direction.
I like that. We're in an adolescent stage of humanity, and that's why we're feeling awkward.
Yeah, we're very awkward. Most of us are just little kids running around with guns, and it's just like...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have 2 more questions before we end this.
Mm-hmm.
One is, if any of the viewers watching this right now is one of those people in the FDA or the people that the FDA consults with, what would you want to say to them?
I would say that if you have questions, please take the time to that most of the questions that were raised in that hearing, the answers are there. And so to seek out and get the details of those answers, because we've got them. And that if we can collaborate together, we can make this something that is safe for people.
And last, are you feeling after this decision more disappointed or more hopeful?
I think disappointed, but I think there's a level of I think I'm a little less naive now in the bigness and the paradigm shifting nature of what it is that we're doing. Because I think when we're kind of had our heads down and we're just collecting data and we're part of this and it's exciting, but we're just doing this, and to like recognize how much energy and how much it takes to change a paradigm. It's a lot. And so we've been so close to what we thought was the end. And now it's going to take a lot more stamina. And so I think that's a lesson in and of itself.
I was very disappointed, but my conversations with you have brought me to a place of much more hope. So I want you to know that I am pretty sure that just you being who you are is already bringing hope in other people. I can speak for myself for sure. But I have been feeling much more hopeful since we talked a lot around this topic, and you really well and eloquently informed me on how things are going, and knowing that there are other avenues and that people have been fighting for this for so long. I'm sure that no one's going to give up. And I also feel pretty confident that at the end of the day, it's going to be just a matter of time.
Yeah.
And when that happens, probably will be so undeniable that maybe even the ripple effects are bigger and stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I would say to the people that have been waiting for this, that are suffering, that ketamine is available right now, and ketamine assisted psychotherapy used. So that's really an important point, that they're doing it with psychotherapy, not just going and doing it with maybe an anesthesiologist or someone that's not getting them the mental health support that they need, but to do ketamine with the psychotherapy, it can also be very effective for PTSD. And so that can be a really great way to get some relief right now, and also to lay the foundations to be able to make further work like way easier. And again, also for therapists that have been waiting to be able to offer this, to go get trained to do ketamine assisted psychotherapy, because so much of the skill set that we use in ketamine assisted psychotherapy translates over to any other psychedelic. So I think we can also be leaning into the tools that we do have.
Awesome. So let's switch to end directly to you. Besides being a clinician for these trials, what else do you do?
So many things. I had a previous career as an oceanographer before I became a clinician.
Woman of many skills, talents.
And I started the Southern California Psychedelic Society, which is called the AWARE Project, to help people understand and get to more educated about psychedelics. I started a group called Inner Space Integration, which is a space for people to find people to help them integrate psychedelic experiences. I do ketamine assisted psychotherapy. I'm involved in research. I'm also a ketamine assisted psychotherapy trainer, along with my colleague Lauren Taus. So I love teaching, and I'm going to be publishing a book in the spring about internal family systems. So
I'm so excited about the book.
So that's the thing that's right on the top of my stack at the moment.
If you agree, once the book comes out, I'd love to have you back in the channel for you to talk about it, because it's so super important, and the way you put it, it makes it so fun and easy to understand.
Yeah.
So would you want to be found? And if so, where?
Yeah, my website is ashleybooth.net. And I do obviously therapy as well as consultation for people that are either getting into the industry of psychedelics, or they're a therapist that maybe needs to have consultation with someone that does ketamine assisted psychotherapy, or just people that are needing help with integration, and harm reduction around psychedelics.
Fantastic. So I'll make sure to add that into the description of this video. If you want, I can also add the other things that you mentioned. So we can talk about that later. And I'll link it down in the description below. And this was eye-opening and fun to talk about. I'm very happy that this information now is out. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your presence. Thank you for saying yes to this. Any last words, or we're done?
Thank you for wanting to get information out to people, and for trying to educate the world about what's going on inside of us, so that we can be better people to one another and better love ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you, Ash. So that's the end of our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be linking all of that in the description, and I will be seeing you next week we'll see what our next video is. But as for now, we're signing off, and bye. Did you know you could be part of this podcast? If you would like to be my guest, submit your unique medicine or healing story to hello@ivanchokran.com.